Hey everybody, I'm joined by someone I've talked to on a few occasions. Always love our conversations. Mahish, welcome. Introduce yourself to the masses, if you would.
Absolutely. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Mahish Mahendarkar. I'm currently a security engineer too at Milwaukee Tool. A little bit about my background. I've sort of had some work experiences in all the big heavy hitters around cyber, defense contracting, manufacturing, MITRE, product security spaces. And now I find myself at Milwaukee in kind of a security engineer position where working on some of the SOC type of stuff, some of the SIM type of stuff, and really just overall helping mature Milwaukee's security posture. Yeah, I'm super excited to be
Excellent.
here. Thanks,
You
Coach.
said you said the magic word and what I wanted to bring you onto the show to talk about. Um, mature, maturity, right? Um, let's start with this. I don't know if this is a simple question, but this is like an open-ended question. Like when you say security maturity, like what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I agree. It is a very loaded question, and I think what's worked for me in all the various stops I've had up till this point is always defining maturity by the nature of the business that I'm in, or what the main powerhouse of the company we're at. So just having the business side and the security side both having an equal part, having that two-way communication channel, and defining a roadmap of what expected outcomes out of security would be, then expected outcomes from the business side. That's always like a really great place to start. Now, obviously, there's different compliance requirements that different companies face, different jurisdictions and whatnot, and that obviously starts that conversation pretty clearly. You have kind of a framework to go off of, but
Yeah.
um, that's what maturity means to me, like business and security, hand in hand, making progress together.
Is there an outcome or a goal of maturity? Like how do you even measure that? As you're building the bridge between the security organization and the business, like what is the common language, kind of outcome driven metric of maturity? And I know it's going to differ from one organization to the next, but like you've got a tons of experience and done a ton of different jobs and roles and you've built your own personal maturity in the security space. We'll get into that in a second, but is there an outcome driven metric or a metric that kind of holds, defines maturity, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most straightforward answer to that would be being compliant with whatever frameworks your company needs to be compliant with, as in just having
Yeah.
that audit compliance, getting that checkbox checked. But I would also say that this 10,000 foot strategy involves your audit compliance, being positioned to address different risks that the business is facing, having
Hmm.
goals for development and outcomes of personnel of the overall security team, right? Being able to consistently identify where improvement is necessary, right? There's a lot of AI stuff happening out in the security space, just in the tech space in general, and understanding where that matches with where the company is headed, where the overall goal of the security team, right? Is it supposed to become a fully AI driven team? Like, do we want that decision making to be taken away from human beings or not? Right. And then
Yeah.
say like the last two things to throw in there would just be having proper documentation. Like documentation builds automation. So having that there, then also the last piece would be metrics led decision making. So I think that's exactly what you're asking, right? What metrics do we
Yeah.
do to decide what our next steps need to be? Even just defining what metrics are relevant and understanding, okay, when we're seeing a 15% increase in mean time to response, what does that mean for us as an organization? So having some of
Yeah.
those numbers defined. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's great. I think as you were talking, I was thinking through like, God, how do you measure maturity? Right. And there's all kinds of vendors that put like maturity frameworks out. And then, the analyst firms put maturity frameworks out. And I'm a keep it simple thinker. And I'm like, at the end of the day, and you punch holes in this or feel free to agree or disagree. I'm like, at the end of the day, if I'm a customer or an organization, I think of maturity as an element of resilience,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. I
Are
couldn't
we
agree more.
it's a moving target, right? Attackers are constantly evolving. They're doing new things. There's new compliance mandates being passed down, et cetera, all for the purposes of being resilient to, an attack, right?
Mhm.
Whether that's resilience pre-compromise or post-compromise or whatever it might be. And and this is where I wanted to kind of foray into the second part of our conversation around that constant state of change in cyber, and how you begin to think about and changes from like a technology standpoint, from a attack landscape standpoint, threat standpoint, whatever it might be. Like, how do you guys even think of like maturity through the lens of resilience? Like, what kind of questions are you asking yourselves in terms of like, are we resilient to this? What kind of questions are the business asking you guys in cyber around
Mhm.
that? And how do you answer typically?
Yeah, so I think the best way to address those questions coming from business, like we have to understand that their perspective on it is primarily around the severity, right? Or hearing in the news, oh my God, there's remote code execution, accounts are being taken over. What could we possibly do to handle that? And I think the best way for security to respond whenever these questions come our way is to have some structure and some order to it, right? So being able to point back to, yep, this is where we're at for audit compliance, right? These are the controls that we have implemented in our environment to protect this. Having that documentation, having the proof, having, the breadcrumb trail showing what we're doing to address new challenges or new attack vectors that have just been released. That's the biggest thing. So like a lot of what handling new technology or new risks comes from is knowing your own house, right? Like I think a really good example that I always like to go back to is just sailing on the ocean, right? Like when you're a small boat, maybe you have a couple, like way fewer positions than a huge battleship. But either way, you're still addressing a couple things, right? You need to know what the waves are like, right? If
Yeah.
there's any storms
Yeah.
predicted, like who's doing what, if there is a man overboard, whose role is it to go and save them, right? Like having that
Yeah.
incident response framework and that plan laid out, the whole team bought into it and agreeing and actually being able to execute on it. So I think a
Yeah.
lot of this comes from setting some standards of what security will be able to address and how we want that response or remediation to be defined, and then working with the business on it. So,
Yeah.
tying it
I think,
back. Mhm.
yeah, I love that perspective because it's like, it's, resilience, risk, resilience, maturity, whatever the word is. It's like fundamentally it comes down to, hey, we see this happening in the market. Are we at risk?
Yep.
What level of risk are we at?
Mhm.
Right. Um, that's something that the cybersecurity team should understand and know and have that documented, right? And be on top of that. Are we resilient? If I'm the business leader board, right? Okay, should this happen to us, are we mature enough or resilient enough to withstand this type of
Mhm.
attack or threat or whatever it might be? You guys would know that as well. Do we have the processes and documentation and controls in place? Yes, yes, yes. It's like reassurance, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of reassurance that comes with resilience and maturity. There's also, and you touched on this, there's also a lot of transparency. So what happens when the answer is no? Like, yes, we are at risk. No, we're not resilient to this. Like,
Yeah.
how does that conversation manifest?
Yeah, and I think a lot of what leads that is just understanding your signal to noise ratio, right? Like making sure you have the right noise coming in to where it's actually signals of, hey, right, we have just identified a risk. We aren't able to address it. How can we still chart a path forward? Because if this risk really is substantiated and it really is impacting, it could potentially impact business operations and our ability to make money. That's absolutely, the role of security to be able to jump in and provide that path forward. And I would say that, to answer your question more directly, like what do you do when business comes to you with that? I think the first thing is to explain why we're not able to handle something in the current state. But the most important part is explaining we can if we take a couple more changes, right? If we engage with a new vendor, if we build out a new team function, if we, have some way of logging this issue and making sure that we have an action plan to remediate it. So, like I know software developers talk a lot about having a backlog of features or a backlog of tasks. I think there are a lot of shared ideas between security at scale and even just development, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes from being able to whittle down all that noise, all the risks that are floating out there, right? Bring it into an actual signal. What is relevant to us? Okay, now that we've identified it's relevant to us, are we able to fix it? We're not able to fix it. Okay, that's not going to work. What is our path forward to be able to fix it, right? And a lot of
I
times, like having your business guys on the same page with you, being able to trust in your opinions, and even if they don't trust it, that's fine. That's what the documentation comes in, right? To be able
yeah.
to prove
Yeah.
why we're making decisions.
Yeah, and I mean this. I love that because you just triggered this whole notion of, it isn't always about how does security respond to the business leadership, executive team, board when they hear about some new threat or risk out in the wild. Yes, you've got to answer that question. Yes, we're at risk. Yes, we're resilient to that. Here's our documentation. Here's our process. Here's our technology. This is how we're mature enough to withstand this threat. But flip that around, and you talk about signal and noise. There's also a huge opportunity, and I wonder if you have examples of this, because this feeds into your architectural conversation and kind of building people, process, technology to anticipate future risk or emerging threat or emerging risk that helps you make a business case for an architectural change or an investment in a tool or a service or whatnot. Talk to me a little bit about how you use that signal or how you guys get ahead of it. Like what are you guys doing or what have you done in the past where you're taking more of that proactive stance, and kind of sharing emerging risks that the business may or may not have heard about, externally.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a great example for this. So a while back, I was at a product manufacturing company. They're coming out with 10,000 new products every single year. And they've been doing really good in that. They've got a lot of automation going, there's security testing involved. But as the security folks were more involved with that and the conversations with business became deeper beyond just, hey, are we compliant with the checks that we need to do? Right. As we really dove into those conversations, one thing that the business side kept coming back to was this idea of not knowing the unknown risk, right? And if at least we're able to have some understanding of how our product might perform in a risky environment or in an environment that isn't, a perfect little sandbox or something, that would be of net value because that gives more opportunity for the development work to occur. So a project that I contributed to in this space was basically developing a virtualized sandbox environment that is imperfect, and then use this product in this virtualized environment to run through different types of cybersecurity scenarios, right? If there's if the main server that's connecting to this product has been hacked, how can we, as a security team, identify ways to pinpoint, hey, the server is communicating incorrectly, right? Like maybe having certificates, maybe having some secure architecture, some secure design there where we have checks and balances that are, providing non-repudiation, that only certified technology is communicating to that edge device. That's awesome, right? So
Yeah.
what we ended up doing there with that project was we simulated a couple like common scenarios, right? Remote code execution, server takeover, ransomware on the overall network. And by running through these scenarios, the first thing was we had to actually map out, right? What would the attack path be? What could be at risk, right? So when there's certain products that are affecting people's day to day, that's one thing. But when it's actually life threatening, right? If we're talking about like a ventilator in a hospital, now the risk of malfunction is a lot greater. So when we're testing all these edge cases or edge scenarios, or we're just doing some research, right? Like what's happening out there in the hacker space, right?
Yeah.
Going on the blogs, looking at IoT stuff, talking to developers in person, right? And I keep going back to that conversation between the business side and the security side is so crucial because as you talk, you learn a lot more about, ideas or new risks or, this seems like a, situation that shouldn't really affect us. But what if it did affect us, right? How can we
Yeah.
actually respond to that? And that's the
Yeah.
resiliency of the whole relationship there.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's like what you're describing to me feels and sounds like um, shifting the paradigm from security being viewed or bogged down with constant defense mode to investing time and energy in offensive security,
Mhm.
right? Running simulate, it's research oriented. It's
Yeah.
like we got to run simulations. We've got to, and that's of huge value. I always talk about the SOC or like cybersecurity team as being this, the ultimate value to the business is this center of intelligence,
Hmm.
right? It's like
Hmm.
we research and understand the attack environment, the business environment, and instead of reacting to potential threats that might occur to our environment, we're actually proactively, offensively going on offense and testing to make
Yeah.
sure we are resilient to this type of attack. And again, resilience or maturity, whatever the word you want to call it, to your right, it boils down to, okay, what are the crown jewels? What ultimately is at risk?
Mhm.
What's the impact of that risk? Right. And that's a conversation anyone can understand.
Absolutely.
Right.
Right.
And I think
Proactive
that that's
risk
a,
management right
yeah,
there.
and that's ultimately what we've always been after. And it's just, I think as an industry, we sometimes struggle because we're constantly reacting to what, emerging new threats. And that's a whole separate conversation with you that I think we need to have around shifting the paradigm from reactive to proactive. And what does it take to do that? Right.
Mhm.
Reactive resilience versus proactive resilience. I think of it as like proactive is, hey, are we resilient pre-compromise before an attacker even gets onto the network, right? Or how resilient are we post-compromise?
Mhm.
Should an attacker infiltrate our network? Right? How resilient are we? How fast can we detect them and stop them? What did we learn from that
Yeah.
attacker's behavior and movement and whatnot? How do we take those learnings to further build our resilience, pre-compromise or reduce exposure, et cetera?
Mhm. And
Um,
I think that's something that for people that have not had a ton of security experience, I think that's something that they really struggle to wrap their head around, right? But if again we go back to the ship example, you need to be prepared if a big wave were to come, right? You need to know
yep,
how you're going to handle that, who's going to help out what, right? Making sure the crown jewels are protective. But you can't control the ocean, right? You
yep,
don't know what'll be out there. You don't know what these hackers or researchers will uncover. You don't know about new CDEs that might become super, super critical. And now you're rushing to patch it, right? But if you at least have a patch process in place, you know you can react when you need to. But when you have that focus on proactive management as well, that gives you that feeling of confidence, that resilience, the business buying into your initiatives, supporting the budget, right? All the important
yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah. 100%, 100%. That is a, yeah, I'm gonna have you back on because there's a whole other meaty conversation around that I love. I love picking your brain and figuring out, where, you know, um, you know, how we go about doing that and accomplishing that. Um, this is awesome. I do this with a bunch of guests on Cyber Minds. Is like we covered quite a bit in looks like 18 minutes and 48 seconds so far. But I'm a three things person. Call me a thinker. Someone referred to me. Are you a thinker? You think in threes? Yeah, we all think in threes.
Yep.
Three things, like based on this conversation, based on your experience, your knowledge, you know, what three takeaways do you have for our audience relative to the word maturity or what we forayed into resilience?
Yeah. So I think number one would be communication. That is the most important thing you can do as a security technical person, managerial, like wherever you're at, like having good communication and the documentation to support it is crucial, right? That I think there's no escaping that. So that's obviously going to be number one. I think the second thing would be when it comes to maturity, right? As you had said at the beginning, keeping it simple, not thinking of this as like 50 million different things that are happening all over the internet and random locations all across the globe, but really boiling it down to, okay, what are our focus areas? Make sure compliance is met, make sure business support and requests are being met. And then beyond that, how can we further organize and categorize our work to where there's more structure? And if there are, active threats that happen, how can we handle that? Right. So then the last piece I think would be having the right perspective and being able to frame your work in the context of your company, in the context of your leadership, in the context of the larger goals that you're aiming for, right? Obviously, right now, as I'm in a product company and I've had some experience in other product companies, and the main thing for them is to grow, right? To sell more product. So understanding what your VP level and your C-suite level is interested in from being able to accomplish that goal, and then figuring out, where does security fit into this? Is security going to be there to be able to give us greater confidence when we bring products to market that these are safe and they won't get stripped down or removed,
Yep.
or all of our proprietary information will be lost? But really just focusing on that, I think would be the last piece of advice I will leave
Yeah,
you all
that's
with.
that's awesome. I love that. That's three pieces of advice that is highly transferable to other disciplines
Mhm.
outside of security. And in the last one I love too, it's just like it's also when you think about that, common language, communication, practical thinking, aligning to the business, etc. Risk tolerance at an organization ebbs and flows,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
I love your example of like product organizations and working for product organizations and how they think. And it's about, hey, it's all about growing and building and selling a product that delivers value and seeing that growth over time. And you think about, you know, during this is probably another podcast. When is risk tolerance highest and lowest in an organization? Well, it depends on the organization. I would think like a major product launch. We are launching
Mhm.
a new product. You look at like Apple and how buttoned up and tight they are when they come to like product launches, because their risk tolerance is extremely low before a product launches, while it's being developed and before launch day. Um, the cyber team should know that. They should know when products are launching and how big of a deal is this product. What's the risk level of this leaking or not having first mover advantage or whatever it might be.
And
Great, we're going to change our aperture on
mhm.
what we're looking for,
And to
right?
speak
We're
to
going
the
to,
maturity of what we've been talking about this
yeah,
whole time,
yeah,
right? Like in this
yeah,
specific example, what
yeah,
is probably the number one risk for that company if the product details were to leak early, right? Like
yeah,
losing that competitive advantage. So that's where
yeah,
security comes in to provide work around, look, we can have some specific nets set up to catch if any of our employees are sharing information outside, right? We
yep.
can like set up that type of detection, that type of alerting. We can grab the appropriate type of evidence. And then reviewing this with the business might even surface additional things like, okay, it's great that you have an ability to see if PDFs are being sent out, but we need a little bit more because we work with proprietary software in a different file type. Can you watch for these file types? Right. And that's where that collaboration really delivers on what security needs to be doing for the business.
That's awesome. Manish, this was awesome. Thanks again for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having
Always
me,
love
Coach.
talking to you. Always love talking to you. We'll tee up another one. Obviously, your time
Yep.
will dictate that. But again, thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Um, like it, comment, give us ideas, agree, disagree, whatever. This show and Cyber Minds and bringing people like Mahish on is all about just starting conversations, having conversations, open and honest, transparent, um, so we all can be better at what we do. Mahish, thanks
Yeah.
again. We'll
Thank you
see you
very
on the
much for
next
having
one.
me.
All
See ya.
right. Bye bye.
Bye.